Welcome to Surrender School.
Hello, everyone. Why don't we start with just a brief mindfulness grounding practice? And you can have your eyes open or closed, whatever you prefer. And just begin by taking several deeper breaths, sensing into your stomach and diaphragm. Just slowing down your pace if you can, relaxing into the chair. And just start by beginning to notice the state of your body. If it's tired, if it's energized, if it's like a distant planet that you can't locate, just bring some awareness down into your body to see if you can find its atmosphere in this moment. If you notice sensations, just be aware of where they're at. And then bring attention into your heart center. And just take some time to be aware of what is the feeling state of your heart. Is it open and joyful? Is it closed down and sad? Is it filled with lots of fear? Or is there kind of a gentle stillness that's abiding in your heart? And just to notice it, we're just taking kind of a photograph of each of the centers. And then bring attention up into your head center, commonly found right in the forehead where the monkey mind stays busy 24/7. And just in this moment, notice the atmosphere of your head center. Is it like a 4-lane highway with thoughts buzzing back and forth? Is it like a quiet day at the beach and thoughts are still and less active? Is your head center filled with cloudiness and uncertainty? Just to notice what's going on in my head center. And then just take a moment to abide with whatever level of stillness you find in your gut or your heart or your head center. Not trying to change anything, but just being with whatever is showing up there. Trying to keep your inner critic out of the picture. There's no right way to do this. And then take one nice breath. Open your eyes when you're ready. We'll jump in. So we're talking about the beloved type 1 today, and just as a reminder, all of the types, when they're healthy, are really awesome. And all the types, when they're not healthy, have their own way of being a pain in the neck. And it's true across the board. So there's no best or worst types. There's some that are more visible with their neuroses and extroverted more, but we're all pretty much on the same level when it comes to this journey of spiritual growth in humanity. As my mentor would say, we're all crawling on our hands and knees next to each other, trying to support each other home. So there's no champions in the lead. And he says, if you think I'm a champion, that's just your personality rating me, but that has nothing to do with my humanness. So try not to put me on a pedestal. And I always appreciated that in him, reminder, because for a good part of my life, I put people on pedestals because it's almost like if I put them on a pedestal, maybe I'd pick up some of their energy, and then I could, sort of fly with them into the mountaintop. So that's all human, for sure. So I want to just let you know of a couple things here. One is my website, which is Enneagram Maine, and let's see if I can pull this up for you and see if you can see it. Well, let's just start with this. This is my interview channel on YouTube. So after we do the type 1, if you wanted to take a look at all the type 1 interviews I've done, you get a really bird's eye view of the type. That's why I like to do in-depth interviews, is I get all the types talking about the heart and soul of their experience. So it's a great resource if you want to check that out. And then the other resource is my website. Now, Cheryl, is this coming through? Is my website showing up?
Yes.
Okay, so Maine Enneagram Center for Transformation and Wellbeing, and I've got a large section on addiction and well-being. Also have a blog I do, which often focuses around addiction, and then my coaching page, if you want to check that out. But a lot of great information, and usually when I do a video like this, is I put it on the website, so one place to access it. And then I just want to start in on taking a look at this type 1 story. So, we're talking about chapter 4, the merciful teacher. So I want to just start with some discernments. The first one is the type 1, known as a perfectionist, reformer, and merciful teacher, is endowed with a great passion to do the right thing, to serve people selflessly, to live by a code of honesty and integrity. He or she walks their talk and is an inspiration to others. He's merciful, hardworking, responsible, and has the gift of being able to see the fundamental goodness in everyone and how hard they are trying to do the right thing. So the type 1, at their best, is kind and gentle and considerate and egalitarian, has a real flair for being fair with everyone, democratic, everybody gets a fair shot. So when I'm healthy as a type 1, the merciful teacher, I have this desire to provide the best information for people, to instruct them in the ways that will support their work, to help people alleviate mistakes that could cause them suffering. There's a real passion for service with a healthy type 1, of bringing their gifts into service for humanity. So for the type 1, that's a lot of times the clarion call, the spiritual call. When they're healthy, when their heart is open, and when they're not suffering, there is a generosity of spirit, which is true for all the types. When any of the types is healthy, they have an open heart, a wish to help others, to shine the light on others, and a capacity to recognize that no one is better or worse than the other. There's a real equality awareness in any of the types when they're healthy. So when we talk about the type 1 in addiction, then there's a shift. In an addiction, the one's compelled and obligated to fix what he or she sees as wrong, and then becomes judgmental, self-righteous, critical, hateful, and harsh toward himself and others. His gift of service disappears, and the following is an overview. So I want to just walk through some of the key ingredients here. The deep wound, the relapse pattern of the 1 is her fear and belief that he or she is bad, defective, and unredeemable, that their instincts and feelings must be suppressed and controlled to avoid making mistakes. So there's this sense, for a type 1, when they come into recovery, this particular wound is usually pretty loud, a feeling internally that I've done something bad, or that I'm innately bad, that I'm hopeless. And when I'm really in a tough place and I'm suffering with that core wound, I then am inspired to let you know that you're bad and defective and unredeemable. So I project it out, and all of us do this based on our type, that when we're in our suffering wound, at a certain point, it's too much to bear alone, and so we project it out and we share it with friends and family and whoever else as a reflex to try to take care of my own heart. So a key commandment for the one is to be error-free. Now, every one of us has a one-ish quality inside of us. Nobody gets cheered up about their errors, but type 1s are the commanders when it comes to being error-free in any activity that he or she engages in, such that no one will challenge his skillfulness. So there's this innate wound for the type 1 that I've done something wrong. Excuse me. And the way that I protect myself from having that wound triggered is I try to do things perfectly so no one ever gives me a hard time about the quality of my work. Errors signal that he or she is flawed and defective and thus not worthy and not good enough. So in many ways, for all the 9 types, there's a certain experience that they have that just brings up that sense that I am not loved, I'm not worthy of love. And for the type 1, a major one is whether I've made a mistake or not, whether I've done something imperfectly. And so the way I compensate for that, if you have type 1s in your life, they tend to be really self-reliant. They don't want you to interfere with their work because you might make a mistake that they become responsible for. So they have a little bit of a controlling edge around getting things done. And there's also a kind of code for them in terms of protecting themselves, where it's like I turn my heart off and I stop feeling how much I need other people, because depending on other people could mean that I could get hurt or that someone would see my flaws and judge me. So it's just, in a sense, a kind of conundrum the one has. And when they come into recovery, even, this particular pattern doesn't disappear after someone sort of cleans up their addiction patterns. It actually gets clearer. I start to see what drove my addiction. And so that, the underlying issues of the one, there's a lot around judgment and resentment and feeling frustrated with themselves and others. And if you live with a 1, you probably know what that feels like. And hopefully we have a couple of 1s here today who can tell us about that experience as we open up for questions. So the deep wish of the 1 is to feel their innate goodness and what's fundamentally right and sacred about them and the world. There's an instinctive sense that at the core of human beings is just a real goodness. And that they have a sense that it's there, they just don't know how to get there. So 1s usually want to be fair, reasonable, kind, and truthful, and to serve and improve the world for everyone. So again, this theme of service, bringing out the best in others, quality control experts, their very best, they're very generous in giving advice that can improve whatever you're doing. And so, for the 1, their self-image, regardless of how healthy they are, is the 1 sees themselves as someone who's reasonable, principled, impartial, fair, truthful, and inspired to improve himself, herself, and the world. So the self-image is actually what I'm trying to be, and the healthier I am, the more I just naturally do these things, I exude these qualities. But as I become more constricted or tight or filled with undigested suffering, then I'm trying really hard to at least look like this. And that's where I start to get tighter with myself, more judgmental of self and others. So we talk a bit about the levels. So I want to just make a jump here and look at, so in all the types, we've got 9 levels, right? Levels 1, 2, and 3 is when I'm in a healthy place in relationship to my personality and my soul and my life. We say that when somebody is at level 1, 2, and 3, their ego is quieter, their wish to help others is stronger, their sense of valuing themselves is available, and their clarity about how they can serve others becomes stronger as they continue in recovery. When people come into recovery, we usually say they're at level 5 and 6. That they're suffering, that they're not feeling lovable, that they're violating their values, which is making them feel terrible. And at level 5 and level 6, What I do is, as a type 1, is when in doubt, first I judge myself and then I judge you. First I, take out my sort of self-hatred on myself, and then I remind you what's hateable about yourself. It's just, what are friends for when they're down the levels and they're suffering? First I feel it myself, and at level 6, I start to get aggressive. I start to, again, feel more desperate. So you want to figure at level 4 on down, the type 1 is losing contact with their open heart, with their naturally buoyant capacities, and they're squeezing tight like a fist would, and the reason is because of undigested hurt, anger, humiliation that usually evolves from childhood experience, something they had to shut down on when they're little boys and little girls, and so to that extent, they meet life on these lower levels, defending themselves against the feeling that I'm not loved, and compensating by being overly perfect or being overly critical of you. And sometimes people say that with type 1s in their life, that they can feel judged by the type 1 without the type 1 even speaking a word. It's like in their atmosphere almost. They have this sense that I just got judged, but he or she didn't say anything to me, but I just felt annihilated by that look or by the way he or she held their body, etc. So the more desperate I am around feeling like I'm valuable, and I'm caught up in the feeling that I'm bad or evil, which is a big one for the type 1s. It's like there's this Achilles heel that gets poked, which says, you are evil, you're bad, you're irredeemable, you're hopeless. And that's the core wound for the type 1. And when that's triggered, usually the type 1 comes out, fighting for themselves, gets aggressive, gets attacking. So you can know that as the type 1 becomes more judgmental towards those around them, that on an inner level, their heart is breaking. They feel that they're not loved, and they don't have the capacity to take a breath and sense into their heart and say, oh my gosh, I feel incredibly unlovable here. It's just so painful. But levels 5 and 6 are overwhelmed with that. And so the defense pattern is to come out swinging with judgment, with perfectionism, with finger pointing on how you're not doing something right. So again, in terms of working with types, any of the types at level 4, 5, and 6, when they start to exhibit their protective patterns, which is really protecting their heart's hurt, are not conscious that they're doing it. It's just a reflex of the soul. So they don't sit back and go, okay, I'm feeling defective, irredeemable, and bad. I think what I'll do is take that out on my friend Bill. It's not a conscious process. It's just like their heart is freaking out and they just react. So these are, in all the types, each of the type has a different way they react under pressure. And the one is they go more aggressively judgmental and more impatient with the flow of how things are going. At the deeper levels, it gets worse. But I think for our own conversation, this is good enough to go. So let's see. Again, going back to the levels. When the 1 is in an unhealthy state, level 4 and below, he or she increasingly falls prey to the emotional habit of resentment. And resentment is, I feel responsible for everything, but you don't seem to feel responsible for anything. What's going on here? Why do I have to be the responsible one? So in this state of resentment, if you're a type 1, you know what it's like to chew on resentment. And of course, all of us do from time to time. 1s just tend to do it a little more habitually. And in this state, he or she is driven by his frustration with the imperfections he witnesses in himself. It's like the more my heart closes down, the more the standard of perfection gets louder in my consciousness, and the more I'm frustrated with all the errors I see in myself and those around me. So what we say about the type 1 is as they're more contracted and more under pressure, they have this tendency to see what's wrong with everything and to miss what's good with everything. They just start to, they walk into a room and they immediately notice, oh, the walls are not in symmetry to the floor. What's going on here? Or, the couch is like, it's a little bit off, and somebody here doesn't know feng shui. Like, what is wrong with them? Or, so any of the sort of micromanaged detail that doesn't fit their scheme of organization, they feel it's like their body kind of freaks out. It's like, oh my God, who lives here? Who can live like this, right? So they get really more hyper about the flaws, not only in the external world or in you. I used to have one type 1 friend, before we would teach a workshop, she'd come up and say, your left eyebrow needs a little trim. Do you mind if I do it for you? I said, have at it. Just don't cut it off, okay? But there's this sense of, I just see whether there's symmetry. So down the levels, I get a little bit aggravating with this, and I can get aggressive around it. And then I add to this the mental habit of judging myself, others, and reality as imperfect. And resentment intensifies. It's almost like ones have an innate sense of how things would be operating if everything was perfect. And then, of course, you walk out into the world and go, oh my God, it's chaos out here. There's hardly a thing that's perfect. Maybe when I'm in nature, that's when I settle down a bit. So that sense of that, things are flawed or falling apart or out of control, type 1s recoil with even more need to control whatever they can get their hands on. And so, if you've been in the life of a 1 who is down the levels and not, feeling well, their tendency to want to control everything is strong, including yourself. And when people come into recovery, they're usually pretty wound up with this sense of judgment and resentment. It's just like on the front burner when they come in. And the challenge is, how do I help the type 1 to start to relax this judgmental pattern and not take it so literally? So, it's a whole journey regarding mercy. How do I invite type 1s into the idea that it's all right to make errors, and mercy actually goes farther for changing things than beating the crap out of myself, right? As my mentor said, whatever you beat up inside of yourself, you strengthen its capacity to run unconsciously. So if you're going to beat yourself up, I recommend use a feather and stop hitting yourself, because that just intensifies your fixation with that pattern that you're trying to get rid of. So I want to just, a few other things, then we'll have a few questions. Inner critic. The one's inner critic tells him he or she is good and lovable if he or she follows his ideals without error and doesn't make mistakes. Mistakes are not permitted. So you figure each of us has an inner critic that reminds us of when we've made an error. Type 1 tends to be a little more ferocious and mean-spirited. We all have, you could say we all have the flavor of 1 in us, so we're not, it's not like we're separate from the other type 1s. So part of the work we can do to understand the type 1 is to really begin to try some of the practices that they need to work with to relax their inner critic. So when a type 1 does something wrong, he has this sense that I am responsible for fixing it. And then there's more resentment, like why do I always have to be the responsible one? But at their best, the 1 is endowed with common sense. They don't have a need to be right, they have a need to find out what's the best solution. They have the capacity to see both sides of an issue. There's a grounded, egalitarian way that they operate, and the willingness to give up personal needs for the service of the community. So there's a sense of like, what is the best I can give of myself right here, right now? Healthy type 1s, sometimes that means I give up my wish so something for the greater good can happen. So he tells the truth, lives by a standard of integrity that he expects himself to follow, and he walks his talk. So a healthy 1 is wired to inspire people to better behavior rather than to correct them into better behavior, right? So, I walk my talk, I live my ideals, and if that inspires you to be a better person, awesome. But I don't finger wag and I don't proselytize, because I think I'm aware that if people are inspired by good actions and they come to it willingly, they have a better chance of actually embodying that good behavior. So he walks his talk, inspires others to do the same. And healthy 1s are also really open to hearing when their actions are not working, or when they've done something that isn't for the best of people. There's a way that they can receive criticism that doesn't trigger a massive response of I'm a terrible and horrible person. So a healthy one has done enough healing of their own heart and the judgments that they grew up with, so that if someone says, Tom, I think you really missed the boat on this one. That one, I think you could have done that better. It doesn't, take them to the ground of I'm nobody, I'm not good, I'm a bad person. But there's like, oh, okay, tell me more, because as Richard Rohr, who's a type 1, once said, the thing about being a type 1 is that, you see all your flaws, and if you really get healthy, you begin to laugh at them and go, wow, I do have lots of flaws. I guess I can, relax and work as best I can, and as things unfold, I'll get better. And I remember he was on Oprah, and Oprah said to him, okay, Richard, you're like one of these holy men. What percentage of the day would you say you are conscious and present? He said, well, Oprah, 30%. She said, what? Only 30%? He said, well, wait a second. It used to only be 5%. I have come a long way. And if I get up to 45% before I die, the angels will be cheering for me. So there's a real gracefulness around my imperfections. So he's merciful. She is merciful toward the flaw of others, and actually sees that everybody's doing the best they can. And that's a really powerful one. There's a woman named Brene Brown who typed herself as a 1, and she said, it really is good for me to recognize and realize that everybody is doing the best they can with the knowledge they have. And if I remind myself of that, I don't drop into my judgment and my frustration so easily. So that's a mouthful. Let's see if any questions are popping up. Thoughts, or Cheryl, you got a list? Or
Yeah, I have a couple. So one of them, Michael, and this has to do, I am an Enneagram. I view myself as an Enneagram 8. And and I'm just going to be talking about meetings here. I say the words, I can spot a 1 across the room. But one of the things reading chapter 1 is that I feel compassion for the ones now, and I never did before. I felt only irritation, right? So now I'm like, oh my gosh. But so I'm going to tell a quick story. Everybody knows the story of Job. And so here's a continuation of it. So, things have happened. His life was destroyed. And he says to God, why? And God comes back and says, I don't know, something about you just pisses me off. So I will say
that was in the Bible. I read that.
No, I don't think so. That's my own version. But I do think there's something about me that pisses off ones. I swear I walk into a meeting and there is something about me that ones are just irritated by. I'm more than irritated. I'm irritated by them, I guess, but it's like I attract them to try to control me. It's the most interesting thing. And I love your interpretation of that relationship between 8 and 1. And I have some other questions too, but that's a personal one.
Yeah. Well, both of them, 8 and the 1, instinctively project a boundary that says, don't enter without my permission. And if you can imagine this, and take what you need and leave the rest. But type 8s tend to have a big aura, a big energy, and for some people that drives them crazy. It's like, back off, right? And here comes the 8 comes in, and they've got this great robust energy, and other people are inspired by that. But it's almost like the two invisible auras, the 8 and the 1, collide, and there's like an electric storm that goes off. And both of them are known for speaking their truth. 8s and 1s of all the types are the ones who just say, this is what is so, and I think I'm right. So there's a natural ground for conflict. And the 1 feels I've got the perfect way, and the 8 feels like I can feel in my body what's the right way, so I don't know what your problem is. So a lot of it's unconscious. And I think trying to be conscious around it means I notice with the 1, Like ones, when they're under stress, it's like they throw little darts out, and they don't even have to speak a word, but there's like, boom, you just felt judged. And they're not even aware of it most of the time. And eights have a same way too. On depression, they're like giving a little jab in the side, and waking you up and shocking you awake. So they're in some ways they're very similar in terms of how they respond under pressure, and both can be delightful and both can be a pain in the neck. And so anyway, that's my take on it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so here's another question, and I want to read it. Now, this is from a 4 who has been in recovery for a long time. Hold on, took a picture of it. And she says, how do I work with a husband who is type 1, who has such blindness to his perfectionistic tendencies and his need to control? It's micromanaging, very rigid, has alienated his sons because of this. Now he's alienating me.
Yeah.
I have been unable to scale the wall for many years, despite my own therapy and work in the program. Makes me want to run away. Is there hope and suggestions for a strategy for this 4 who's working on herself and has a 1 husband who's not?
Yeah. Well, first thing that comes to mind for me is the importance, if possible, of getting into counseling so that you have a third person observing, the fourness and the oneness. And because it's really hard with couples, they really get into kind of habituated ways of being, and the pattern plays over and over and over again. They have the same argument for the 1,000th time, and the one can't see, obviously in this situation, the one can't see that he is judgmental and harming. He probably feels like, I'm right, I'm just trying to fix you guys, right? And that's probably the headset, and that's probably one of his sincere beliefs, is somehow you guys are doing it wrong, and if you just did it right, I'd have a better life at least. So again, it's that blindness. And so what do we do when someone's blind? Well, I have to get skillful with communication. Maybe part of it, ones I've worked with who sometimes projected their self-hatred onto me by judgment, I would simply say, I feel really judged right now, and I wish you would stop. And if they say, oh, I'm not judging you, I said, well, I just wanted to let you know. If you'd like to talk about it, let me know. And I don't go into a battle and try to convince them, but I try to give them a signal in a compassionate way. What you just said, one strategy is just to say, ouch. I just felt so judged right there. And ones initially will go, that's not a judgment, I'm trying to fix you, you're doing it wrong, blah, 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 and say, I just want you to know that that hurts. And if you would like to talk more about it, let me know. I don't want to argue with you. So that's sort of, and that may or may not penetrate, and when ones are really projecting their rightness, they already feel completely wrong and bad, but they can't feel it. And so if you say, that really hurts, it's like another arrow into their heart saying, I'm doing it wrong, I'm hurting my wife. And then I've got to defend against it and remind her why she is doing it wrong. So it's just it's such a terrible cycle. So so there's a number of different things like that. If I was coaching somebody, that's one of them I might say. The other one might be is just a gentle, real letter that when you speak this way, it really hurts, and it doesn't feel like it serves us. And I want to get close to you, but I can't do it when I'm feeling judged. And something like that is repeated over time sometimes can soften the one. There's a lot of different things, but that's what comes to mind.
I muted myself. Thank you, Michael. All right, so now we are open for questions, and if anybody has questions or comments you want to share or whatever, love to hear from the ones for sure. So Ty, I see that you are a sexual 1. Go ahead and unmute.
Yes. Hello. I'm
Hi.
Ty, sexual 1, and it is not always my responsibility, is my mantra. I had to make sure I said it so Cheryl didn't beat me up. But no, I'm just playing. But I date a 2, and I love my 2. But it seems like because I've gone down the journey of overextending myself for people, especially for people that I love. I've been down that road, so I've had to set like healthy boundaries to help me and that person's relationship flourish. Well, it seems like that when I say that, maybe you need to slow down. You don't have to be at every event. You don't always have to go, go, go. They're taking advantage of you. It seems like I'm being how do I hear it? Oh, well, everybody can't, go on silent retreats all the time. Everybody's not a meditator. Because now I'm a meditator and now I do silent retreats. So I'm like, okay, well, you didn't have to jab at me. I'm just trying to help. But it
Okay.
seems like even though I'm trying to help and I do see it clearly, it for some reason it doesn't, it's like I'm coming off as either judgmental
Mhm.
or I want everybody to do the silent thing, or and it's like, no, that's not what I've said. That's not how I just know that you're overextending yourself and you're
Well,
actually making yourself sick.
so if you get a chance to read the chapter on the one, there's like 5 or 6 suggestions.
Mhm.
And one of them is to try to not give anybody advice, even though you see what could improve them, unless they say to you, please tell me what you see, but for type ones, they have a tendency to speak their wisdom before it's been invited. And then
Gotcha.
it can come across as holier than thou, which is, ones will say, I don't mean it that way.
I didn't mean it. Yeah, I don't. Well,
Yeah. But the receiver goes, whoa, I just got judged. Here's the meditator from heaven coming to try to transform me. And oh, no meditation for me. I remember I was working with a panel of ones, and they were talking about how people told them that they felt judged by them a lot. And each one of them said something like this. It says, when I see somebody making an error and I see a solution, I
mm,
earnestly wish to help them see it so they don't cause themselves any more suffering. And why do
yeah,
people get mad at me when I tell them is, well, there's something about uninvited suggestions that trigger people. And so for the type
gotcha.
one, it can be like, if I don't tell you, this is what someone would say. If I don't tell them what they're doing wrong, they're going to miss it completely. So I must tell them. That's what an honest, caring person does. And then they do it, and the person goes,
Yeah.
"Get back! You're wiping me out. I can't." So it triggers something. So the challenge is, how do I relax that earnest wish to help and let
Hmm.
people come to asking on their own? Which, for type ones, what we say about type ones is, when they see something that's being done wrong, they're really
You gotta
fast to
say
fix
something.
it.
Yeah.
Fix it,
Yeah.
let's go, all right. And they're fast at it, right? And the people around them are ducking, going, oh my God, slow down. So it's a tricky one, but it's something to work with. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I
And
can
I
work
invite
on
you to
that.
read those 5 or 6 suggestions. We're going to probably go over them if we have time, but that's, the natural propulsion of the one is that I see an error, fix it. I see an error, fix it. I see
Yeah.
an error. It's like,
Oh yeah.
how about you see an error and leave it for 3 days? 3 days. Oh my God. So anyway,
That's hard.
Yeah.
Thank you,
that's the
Michael.
pattern.
Thank you, Ty. Awesome. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Ty. Thank you for that. Sandy, to you.
Yeah, Michael, that sounds like a homework assignment for Cheryl to add to the type one. See an error and don't talk about it for 3 days.
Just let it be there.
It's all
Yeah.
these completely opposite homework things that we would never consider doing. And um, well, I have a question. I have a dear friend who's a type one, and she is going through a really, really hard time right now. She's read the Wisdom of the Enneagram book. She was in a book study during the pandemic. She's a recovering drug addict and dealing with food addiction now. She's gotten back into the food. She um, has a strong spiritual life. You know, she's got all of this knowledge, and she is really sunken down. She's dealing with the death of her brother a couple years ago with a dysfunctional family. She is angry at every single thing that she sees every day. The car, the people at work who are texting and on the phone instead of doing their job, the people playing the music next door. Talking to her is like this barrage of judgment. And I haven't, I'm a type 9, so I want to make her feel good at all
Yeah.
costs, right? So it dawned on me the other day, I think I'm kind of coing her. Like, yeah, your family is really shitty, and I can't believe, it's going to get better. I know you're going to get the food issue. You've done it before. It'll come down. But I'm not sure. I don't quite know how to what would really be helpful without
Well,
how do I appear merciful without coing her, I guess is the question.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a great question, and it can be a gray area that's hard to navigate. But I would say the first thing that just occurred to me as you were speaking is that with her, the primary emotion that gets triggered for ones when their inner critic is beating the hell out of them is anger. Anger with everything. It's out there when actually it's happening on an inner level. Their own inner critic is inspiring self-hate. Somehow she's got, again, I'm just guessing at this, but her own inner dialogue is that she's failing her own standards and it's unbearable. Somehow she hasn't, stepped up to the level of performance she should. She's blaming herself, and it comes out as anger at everyone else around them. So, what can one do about that? Well, you can't do the work for her, but you can mirror her and say, I hear your anger. That's got to be really painful. So I haven't tried to give her a solution. Just, I hear your anger. That's got to be really painful. Tell me more about it. What's it like in your heart and soul right now when you're feeling that anger? Just so you're creating space for her just to look at that anger and notice it without feeling like you're telling her what to do. Like, wow, I can feel that anger. That sounds like it's coming from the depth of your heart or the depth of your belly. Tell me more about that. That feels really painful as I listen. So all I'm doing is being a mirror without giving an instruction. And if she says something like, well, what do you think I ought to do? That's when you pull out that magic book called The Alchemy of the Enneagram and say, there's these 6 suggestions here. So maybe take a look at them, see if any of them ring true for you. Or, I sometimes, if you have a really good relationship with them, like if I'm working with a client, I'd say, ones have often told me that when they're caught up in anger, that underneath is a terrible feeling that they failed and their heart is hurting and their inner critic is raging at them. I don't know if that's happening for you, but maybe it's worth examining or exploring, as long as it isn't saying this is what I think what's wrong with you, but I'm just inviting sort of an open-minded, open-hearted inquiry into what's going on here. So hopefully we'll get to the 6 suggestions here, which can give some ideas around it, but that anger for the type 1 basically is screaming, I'm hurting, and I feel evil, corruptible, can't be saved, and it's so painful, I can't even admit that, but it just comes out, it's out of desperation. Does that resonate? Does that seem like along the lines?
Oh, it just seems beautiful. I love the way you've turned the suggestions into this really spacious, well, maybe, this, and I feel like that's what I'm really learning so much more from surrender school is how to present information and how to be looking at possibilities. I mean, I think those things that you've suggested, I think would be really powerful for her.
Yeah,
And because I think the other thing, what I've tended to do more than ask her those questions is to say, wow, like I get pissed off at her sisters. I get
sure,
pissed off at, so I want to join her
sure.
and say, yeah, that's okay because man, I'd be so pissed off if someone played loud music at 3 a.m. next door and I know you went over and knocked on the door.
Yeah.
Wow, you've really got a lot of courage to do that. And
Uh-huh.
I know it's
Well,
not helping.
well, it's not. I mean, it's certainly in service of supporting, right? Like I get it. If I was like, if I was in that situation, I'd be raging too. And I really hear your rage. what's that like for you? What's it like to feel that? So that it takes it out of the dramatic scene and back into, can you be with your experience and just be open to what's there? You're not trying to get rid of it. You know, the theory that I abide by is that the more I can be with whatever the experience I'm having and sense that anger, that often I start to sense what's underneath it, and that gives me a little more clarity. So I'm just trying to create space, like, wow, that is intense anger. What's that like? Where do you feel that in your body? That I can feel it in my body. I'm tightening up, and I'm ready to go fight with you. Like, what, you know? And so it's just an added approach.
Okay, so here's the question. I have typically envied perfectionists because I thought that's the best character defect to have. That has changed after reading your book. I understand the deep self-judgment they feel. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I think that's
Well,
a
read that again, if
sure.
you would.
I have typically envied perfectionists. I that's the best character defect to have. That has changed after reading your book because now I understand the deep self-judgment that those perfectionists feel.
Yes. So is it a question about what to
Not
do with?
really a question. I just thought it was an interesting
Yeah,
comment, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think the question nails the answer right there, which is, you know, perfectionism is driven by a sense of my own sense of failure. And the problem with perfectionism, it's like any addiction, you can never satisfy it. Because and ones will say, you know, I do it perfect and I wake up in the morning and there's all these other things I got to make perfect. And I go in and I take on another day and I might get most of them handled, but I wake up in the morning and there's a whole new list of things I need to perfect, and there's no rest and no room for joy or spontaneity. So that's the hook for the type one.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
if it's your employer, you discover that you can never quite do it good enough because there's always some way you can make it a little bit better. So,
Awesome. Thank you. All right,
yeah.
Dave, to you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dave, and I identify as an eight, and I just wanted to chime in on the eight versus one kind of difficulties
Hmm.
that I've experienced. The phrase "the perfect is the enemy of the good" comes to mind.
Hmm.
And a good example of that to me is like a business meeting after a 12-step meeting, where maybe we have six things we want to discuss, but the one is so hung up on the first item, trying to get that perfect, that we're not getting to the other five.
Hmm.
And we usually will say, we're going to have a short business meeting after the regular meeting. And everybody laughs because they know it's not going to be a short meeting, especially depending on who's going to be in it. But, I don't know if this is typical of an eight, but I tend to see the big picture. It's like I want to get at least cover some of each of these six items, not just maybe get the first one right and we'll push all the other five to the next meeting. So that's what's frustrating to me is just we're so busy we can't see the forest for the trees. We're focusing so much on one particular item and not getting to everything else.
Well, as my mentor would say, the type one, when they're doing that, they're giving you an opportunity to notice how you do that in some other facet of your life. And it's irritating because there's some way that you do that too, someplace else. It's just not in this location. Now, that's one perspective. And the other perspective is it would be, you know, I hope at some point that Enneagram wisdom comes into meetings more so that we have something to work with in terms of helping people see their patterns without beating them up. And so that there's just more room for, you know, compassionate conversation. Like, wow, I mean, you know, like with an individual, if someone's really pounding on the one way, I can say, geez, feels like there's no room for anything else. And that really makes it hard for me to even try to communicate with you. So I've created an opportunity as a reflection of how I'm experiencing that person. But I know you know, the thing about the meetings after the meeting is you get to see everybody's personality live, and in color, right? It's like all of a sudden we drop all of our beautiful recovery wisdom and great sharing, and then we just become, this is who I really am, damn it, and this is where I want it to go. So our personalities are alive and well. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for sure.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, Charlie, to you.
Thanks. Thanks very much. And thanks very much for that opening, Michael. I got a lot from it, a lot of identification. I actually came to the Enneagram a few years before before Al-Anon. That was the 12-step program I was in. It was the 1990s when I went to a 10-week workshop, and I went to the workshop thinking, surely everyone's a one, and I couldn't understand that everyone wasn't a one. And then when I met these people called the sevens, I thought they came from a different planet and used their irresponsibility personified. The program's been an enormous help for me, and then now with Surrender School, I feel I'm marrying them together. And I guess I'm not getting drawn into the 8-1 wars, but yeah, I've always felt that phrase, better's the enemy of good, has been my downfall, because I don't see myself so much as a perfectionist, as like a judge or reformer. Well, this could be better if you just did that.
Yes.
And then coming across gratitude lists and such like in Al-Anon has enabled me to say, that's really good. And then pause, and maybe, as you say, be asked for my opinion of how it could be improved, rather than jump in with, this is how we can make it better.
Well, and that's it's like the personality orientation is to see what's missing, how it could be improved. And the conscious practice is to notice what's working great and to give that equal time, and it's almost like ones will say, sometimes it's like, if I start noticing and celebrating what's good, they're going to miss what they're missing. I can't, they're just all going to become lazy loafs that sit on the couch and watch Netflix. So I'll put off noticing what's great, because there's almost like a fear, if I get too, praise oriented, it's going to make them even lazier. So, I got to hold them to the standards. So it's just something to notice. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Okay, Jasmine, to you.
Hi, I'm Jasmine.
Hi,
I don't know what I am, but I think I need to do a little bit more, get educated more before I claim. But anyway, I have these strong tendencies. I can tell you that, like you all said, it's some of each number in us. So this one manifests for me with my son, who has ADHD, lacks motivation. And I find myself being that finger wagging old lady. And I'm like, why does this come up for me? Like, why can't I stop myself? It's like I have no brakes. So I physically removed myself from his room. Like, I'm downstairs, he's upstairs, just to stop myself from like criticizing. I just did it in real time while we were actually talking about this. It's so bizarre. But anyway, it's because I smell marijuana, and I have a hard boundary about not wanting drugs in my house because I'm in recovery.
Yeah.
And it keeps being crossed, and I get emotional, and I get angry as hell. And the thing is, though, a lot of his stuff is, I'm just like that. A lot of my dysfunction from my parents, I'm just like them. And it irritates me when they do it. When I do it, I'm blind. I don't know what's going on, but I'm just grateful for this information. And any advice on not being more tolerant of teenage, I don't know, how can I phrase this? Being more tolerant of people. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, we all get challenged to the hilt by teenagers. They're in our life to torment us and to touch all of our Achilles heels and unfinished business. So that's just what they do. They don't even realize they've been given that script. But it seems to me that learning to be tolerant of other people, in my experience, first starts with becoming tolerant of my imperfections and learning to not be so hard on myself or beat myself up as a strategy for improving myself. Like, if I beat the crap out of myself because I'm not tolerant, maybe then I'll become tolerant. No, if you beat the crap out of yourself because you're intolerant, you'll just become more intolerant, and it doesn't work that way. But if I learn to bring some mercy to myself and go, gee, what, I get triggered by certain things. What is that about for me? How can I sort of look at the issue without bringing in that heavy inner critic that says that was bad, or you were a bad woman, or you were a bad parent, and starting to understand the inner critic voice that is inside of you. What you criticize about yourself, 24/7. So we're going to go through some of the suggestions, and one of the big ones for the one is that they have this tendency to just criticize habitually. How do I stop doing that? How do I learn to hold my tongue even and walk away from it, which is what it sounds like you do. So, and also just, is there a way to notice how you're unkind to yourself? How you, where you don't see your own goodness and your own beauty. And so that's what I've noticed is the more I develop compassion for myself, the less I'm triggered by other people. It just seems to go that way. The more I realize I'm doing the best I can with what I know, then I start to understand, well, so is everybody else. So that's the way I work with it. Yeah, thank you for your question.
So Michael, if you want to go ahead with the suggestions.
Sure. Let's see, where are we here? Okay, so we buzz down the page here a little bit and get to the suggestions. Okay. All right. So first off is just this look at how do I help the type 1? Type 1, if I'm a sponsor or a friend of a type 1 who's really into beating themselves up, you must realize that the extent that the one criticizes you or other clients of the world, he or she also applies this to themselves, which can be hard to remember when you're being eviscerated. This behavior often keeps away those who can help the type 1 heal their sorrow, their self-judgment, and disappointment. He's wired to be independent, self-reliant, and responsible for himself, and he girds himself with the boundary of I'm right and you aren't, so don't mess with me. And that's the type 1 protective pattern. Held hostage by his opinions, he makes others feel unredeemable and condemnable because that's how he already feels. So all of this, what drives all of this is the rejection of his own imperfect humanness. Your doorway to helping the one is embodying your own flaws with grace, kindness, grounded humility, and truth. You become, in a sense, what he or she needs. And really the healthiest aspect I know in working with ones, when I'm able to own my own flaws without self-hatred, type 1s just start to relax their own pattern. So there's something about, being honest about, hey, I'm imperfect, and, there's always something I'm working on. So demonstrate your self-acceptance of your humanness, that to be human is to be flawed, and that embracing and observing one's flaws with a light and kind heart is what transforms the flaws. And so can I become a witness to that? Can I be an example of that? And not because I'm trying to be better or I know the way, but there's something about sincere, what do I love about a great 12-step meeting? People get up and share their flaws openly with humility and kindness. And so part of my work is to mirror whatever that is, that will help the type 1 that I'm working with, to realize they're caught up in their judgment. How can I be an example of self-acceptance so that they have a model for it? Now, that's what I do in my coaching and my therapy work. So let's go down to suggestions for the one. First one, begin to mistrust the certainty of your opinions and judgments. And this is what ones will often say. that ones easily believe their perspective is the truth, whether it's about himself or others, because he experiences this as a fact in the core of his body. It's like, we say type 1s are instinctive types, and when they feel like something's being done wrong, it's in their gut. They feel it in their gut. It's like, since I feel it here, it's the truth. And sometimes it is the truth, but sometimes it's a misperception. And so part of the work for the one is to realize, okay, when I feel like I'm right and I must speak, where do I feel that in my body to begin with? Can I locate it? Can I sense my body and notice, oh, there's that sort of GPS in my body that's saying, I have the truth and I must tell you my perspective. So we say, try these suggestions. Encourage him to consciously put his judging on hold long enough to allow the words of others to touch him and to reach him, which means, can I start to suspend my right opinion and just become open to listening to the other opinion of somebody that perhaps I don't agree with? Instruct him in the following manner. When you notice that you're entrenched by the state of rightness, as my teacher would say, when you're in a state of rightness, your chances that you're wrong are almost 100%. Notice when you're caught up in that, I am right, and I must drive it into your soul. So first notice the sensations in your body, the tightness and tenseness in your viscera, trunk, hands, neck, and shoulders. This is a wake-up call that you've been taken by your type 1 personality pattern. So it's like when I'm in a state of rightness, where do I notice it? Because it feels like it's inside me and I must speak it. Well, it's usually in my belly, sometimes in my chest. So breathe deeply, several breaths, and then if you can, drop the story of being right and get curious about the opinion of others. So there's something around developing a habit of not pronouncing my rightness so quickly, and trying, in a sense, as my teacher would say, see if you can find in the person you disagree with something in what they're saying that you do agree with. See where there is a common bound and start to work with noticing that, because it will slow down your righteousness a little bit. So the next one, instruct him to imagine putting himself in the place of the other and finding what he agrees with or what he could agree with, similar to what I just said. Remind him that a key to his getting long-term sobriety is in becoming teachable, open, curious, and tolerant about the perspectives of others. And of course, we know about that in recovery. Remind him that in the arena of his addiction is way smarter than he is. It feeds on his ego and whispers, you don't need help, you're smarter than these people. If people realize that you are in need of true help, they will give you the wrong advice. Don't trust any of them. So sometimes that's a really big one for the type 1. When I'm consumed by the sense that I know the way, I also develop a kind of mistrust in the opinions of others. So help him to begin to see how clever his inner critic is and how it enters his thought stream through black and white judgments of others and self. There's a right way or a wrong way. That whole black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, is a wake-up call for the type 1, that I'm really being caught up in the judgment system of the one, and I need to really, if I can, bring some attention into my body, feel where I'm self-judging myself, take the efforts to try to neutralize that kind of self-righteous feeling that wants me to strike out and speak and set the other people straight. And so I notice for myself, when I go into self-righteous mode, if I really investigate it and I sense into my body, I'm usually not feeling good about myself. I'm feeling vulnerable. And so when I get righteousness is like sort of overrides the sense of vulnerability and gives me a momentary sense of I'm in power here. I know what's right. But if I can dial it back and sense into my body, usually I'm feeling vulnerable and not good about myself. And if I can notice that, it takes the wind out of my self-righteousness. It's tricky because self-righteousness is very fast and feels very rewarding for a moment until I've delivered the blow, and then I go, oh my God, I did it again. More things to apologize for. So let's see. Begin to sense the suffering that your resentment and judging cause you. Type 1's resentment of others, judgment of others, causes him suffering that he may not be aware of. Remind him that if he slows down enough to sense his body, he will notice that underneath the heavy hand of his judgment and resentment is a terrible sadness, fear, and heartache. So I use that when I notice when I'm going into judgment mode. If I take a breath, and I notice, okay, Naylor, you're really at it today. You're really taking Walt's inventory over there, and you're kind of getting off on it. What's that all about? Well, first off, he's doing the things that other people have told you that you do that irritate them, and now he's doing them, and you're enjoying eviscerating him. But if you draw back a little bit, and in a sense start to feel what's on the inside of my judgment and my resentment, I usually feel some quality of vulnerability that starts to take the wind out of my resentment. And at that point, the type 1 will experience directly how much it hurts him to judge himself and others. So there's a quality of noticing when I'm judging, if I have enough awareness and bring my attention into my heart, usually what's there is a sense of hurt and that I'm not deserving. So it's a practice. Usually I have to make 1,000 mistakes before I finally get it. So don't beat yourself up for not doing this even close to perfectly. Remind him that he must start to observe when he is hypnotized by this insidious, type-specific pattern and is indicative of underlying feelings that he is avoiding. So instruct him when you are caught in a state of judgment, sense deeply into your body and heart and notice what you discover. You may feel your heart is numb or flat or blocked, but see if you can feel behind the numbness. So let's just have a few more questions here, and because we've got about 20 minutes left here. Also, I'm going to stay after if people have questions, if they want to stay on. So Cheryl, you have any more for me? This is my first, I guess you could call it a suggestion. Take what you need, leave the rest, because it's not like I know exactly what should happen. But the first thing is I noticed in my relationship with my family, and particularly my father, that headway didn't begin to occur until I had done really deep healing on my own wounds with my dad, working with other men, other therapists, so that sense of, whatever had been wounded me as a kid, not feeling good enough, etc., got healed. So that when I went back to engage my father, I was engaging him with a healthy heart that had gone through all sorts of transformation, so that I wasn't triggered by him, which made it easier for him to become more vulnerable, speak his truth, and for me to be more accepting. But I had to go heal myself away from him before I was able to come back and be able to, in a sense, inspire a neutral ground for us to meet upon. And the healthier I got, the more he relaxed. I didn't think it was fair necessarily because I had to do all this therapy, but he became a pretty great guy as I relaxed as my healing heart came forward. So anyway, does that resonate for you, or any thoughts on that? I did about 10 or 15 years of inner work until, all had been resolved in my heart around how I felt unloved or hurt, etc. So, next question.
Because I come from a dysfunctional family, then even though I had, in many ways, by improving myself, by evolving beyond the dysfunctionality in which I was raised, I was always drawn back into it. Its toxicity and the effect that it had on myself.
Well, it's a powerful pattern. I hear it's a powerful pattern, and so in response to that, I would simply say this: the 4 and the 1 can get caught up in. They're both very idealistic types that feel like I know what's right for the world and I'm responsible for changing it. 4s and 1s both can get caught in that mindset. And there is a bit of, as my mentor would say to me, Michael, there's a wee bit of grandiosity coming through you right now about you saving the world. Says, I think you have your hands full with yourself. Have you noticed? I go, oh, you are no fun whatsoever. Says, yeah, well, after you save yourself, then it will become a more natural, graceful thing you do to help others, because you'll have all this mercy and compassion you've developed. But he says, the way I see it, your hands are full with yourself for probably a couple more lifetimes. So kind of easy does it there, brother. When you notice you're getting into the big world class looking at things, which I did for many years, try to relax that. And what does it mean to be right-sized and to be gentle with yourself? And that isn't something that one just recognizes and does. That takes a coach or a therapist to remind you when you're in the pattern enough times that you begin to see it before it takes your attention. And the next thing you know, you're out there trying to save the world. And you might have noticed by now the world isn't interested in being saved. At least that's been my experience. But people around me, are working on themselves. So that's what I would say to that.
I have many years in the 12-step world. It is my life, actually. But I started in Al-Anon, and one of the first things I learned was that we shouldn't say that someone's an alcoholic, that they needed to define that for themselves, but that we could say we had a problem with their drinking. So in reading the book, in reading any book about recovery, I tend to see not just myself, but the other. And, and so then my question is, many of the people in my life have no interest in finding out their type. And is it appropriate for me to superimpose what I think their type is? Or, I just don't know that I would be correct. But I definitely like your the hierarchy of the levels of health. That was very helpful. But in terms of typing somebody else, I don't know how. I had enough trouble typing myself, actually. But
Good to know.
anyway.
Well, I just have my opinion around this, so it's very narrow in range, but I don't bother people about their type until they're interested in it, because I've noticed that when I start to do any kind of imposing, people naturally have rebellion against it, like, hey, don't type me, right? Which is appropriate. And so that means I have to be patient. And I've noticed, like, when I used to try to get my kids into it, it's like, no, come on, don't do that Enneagram talk to me. And then one day, my daughter, I've discovered she's been studying it. She knows it well. She knows the types. And I didn't have to say a word about it, right? So I think it's kind of like, alcoholism. When people are ready, they start asking the questions. And so if you, in theory, if you keep working on yourself and become more compassionate and loving and joyful, at some point someone's going to say, well, how'd you get that way? Well, a couple things. I did this recovery thing, Al-Anon, and then this Enneagram thing. Would you like to find out about your type? And I find that a lot of times people say, yes, I want to know about my type. But so part of it's timing. And I think that what I have to be aware of is when I'm wanting someone to see their type, it's because I want them to change.
Well, I want to know how to deal with them, because
yes, well, this is what I would suggest, is the more you develop understanding of the type by reading about them, or let's just say, what type do you think you are? Do you know your type?
Oh, you're asking me? I think I'm a 4.
Okay, so as a 4, I would challenge you to go to my YouTube channel and listen to all the types and start to try to feel into how they're wired. And when I was learning to be an Enneagram teacher, my mentor and teacher Don Riso said, you'll only get good at understanding the types until you can feel into their own psychology, until you can really feel like, what's it like to be in the body of a 1 or a 2 or a 7 or a 9. So part of the work is listening to the other types express their inner world. And that's how I learn about the types and how to be with them, is by listening to types who know their type, who've been working on themselves, and then explain their journey. And then it's like, oh, that's what that's all about. So, and it's even better than a book as far as I'm concerned, but I think books and interviews together. So I would just encourage you to start studying independently about the types you want to learn about, and to try to not worry about typing the people around you. Because at some point you'll just notice their typology, but you won't need to say anything about it. You just start treating them, with more compassion and kindness.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so here's a question that came from earlier today. And this is from a type 9 who says she recognizes she goes into a trance, right? Basically goes into a trance. And her question is, do the other types, type 9 says she does that. Do the other types have a type of trance that they go into too?
Yeah.
Or is it just the no?
Yeah. Every type, once they hit level 5 and down, they're going into their own type trance. So type 1 down at level 5, I'm right, you're wrong. I feel like the world is a place that's going to judge me, so I start reacting by overcompensating and making sure I don't make any mistakes, and I'm in a trance. I'm not objective about it. Type 2, I'm down the levels, and I start feeling like I'm not loved, so I gotta overhelp everyone. I start to become a helpaholic, and it becomes a trance. So each of the types, if you read through, for instance, in my book, you'll see that the trance is really the core relapse theme. And if you read about that, you'll see every type has a trance. 9s sort of go into daydream mode and disappear. Type 1s get big like dragons and, are ready to, fry you in a second. But all the types do have a trance.
Awesome. Okay, so we are sitting just about at the top of the hour. So what we can do is go ahead and, we'll do one more. Cheryl S., we're going to have you ask a question, and then Michael, you'll answer. Then we'll say a prayer to close that, and then you'll stay on. Then Joy will stop recording, and then you'll stay on for another half an hour. Okay, so Cheryl S., to you.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, so much. Thank you, Michael Naylor, so much. Mine is real quick. You have a lot of books out there on the Enneagram. So for what we're doing here, can you tell me exactly which one to get? Do you have a cover page of it you can put up? Or thank you, because I really would appreciate that. And thank you so much for what you're doing here. This is such a blessing. I'm a type 2. Thank you.
Right. Well, so there's a lot of books out there. The ones that I encourage people to read first is The Wisdom of the Enneagram by, Cheryl's holding that up. And then the book I wrote really is which is on, again, the Enneagram and addiction, is an offshoot of The Wisdom of the Enneagram. These were my teachers, and I worked with them for many, many years, and then wrote my book. And then there's another audio by Russ Hudson called the nine ways to wisdom. I'll have to look that up on Audible, but I'll send that to you, Cheryl. Maybe. But Cheryl, do you two connect with each other? You two Cheryls?
We can. Sure.
Okay. Yeah. But those are the 3 that I would start with, and then it just becomes an experiment to find out, what resonates with you. Because there's a ton of books coming out, some of them by very inexperienced people, and so I just always encourage people to read the ones by experienced folks first, and not that those other people don't have good ideas, but I know that these 3 books I think are really good.
Thank you very much. Cheryl, can you put that up again? I didn't see it. Thank you.
That's The Wisdom of the Enneagram.
And what we'll do is I'll get Joy the 3 recommendations you just said, and we'll post it out there, out on the website, so people will see it underneath Michael Naylor's stuff.
Thanks for recovering with us.